Hello, and welcome to this presentation from Feeding the Land Between, a project of the Land Between charity, focusing on why more work needs to be done to preserve and profile agriculture within the Land Between region. My name is Joel Sloggett, and I'm a researcher and analyst for this project.
And my name is Fallon Hayes, and I'm Joel's co-analyst.
Today, we'll be looking at the topic of food security, the current impact of food security on a number of aspects of Ontario's agriculture, how the Land Between can affect this context, and what we can do for a food secure future. So food security is the ability to have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. For some context on that, quote, in 2021, 15.9% of households in the 10 provinces experienced some level of food insecurity in the previous 12 months. That amounts to 5.8 million people, including almost 1.4 million children under the age of 18, living in food insecure households. So now for some threats to our food security, Fallon.
So there are many threats to our agricultural systems, and that lead to threats to our food security. So we're going to talk about threats to food security globally, in Canada and in Ontario, and each of these threats is complex and very diverse. So we have global population, so there will be more people to feed with same or similar amounts of land. Climate change, water scarcity, and water pollution are also becoming larger and larger issues. So climate change is making weather more unpredictable, and water scarcity simply means that water is harder to come by, whether it's due to deteriorating infrastructure or a lack of rain. Water is just becoming more difficult to access. And we're also seeing increased pollution of our air and of our water. Pollution of water especially is very damaging to agriculture and thus food security. Next is this transition to cash crops. So a cash crop is a readily saleable crop produced or gathered primarily for market. So this is pretty much when a farmer grows a crop with the only purpose to sell it. The issue with our cash crops that we're typically growing now is that a lot of them are simply used for animal feed or for export. So they're not directly contributing to the food security of the area that's growing them. Next is development of farmland. So we're paving over some of our best farmland in Canada. Like, for example, in Ontario, the fertile lands of the St. Lawrence lowlands are becoming paved over, and we're losing some of this very productive land. Next is lack or little competition. So within Canada, for example, 70% of food distribution is controlled by only 3 companies. So we have Empire, which is the Sobeys chain, etc., Loblaw, and Metro. So these 3 companies pretty much control most of what we eat. And because their distribution is so strongly controlled, it's very difficult for farmers to haggle a good price and really speak for themselves in these kinds of purchasing processes with these big companies. And next is trade agreements and disruptions to supply chains. So due to these, a lot of times there is squeezing profit margins. So farmers are making less and less while producing the same. And we're also seeing that these supply chains are vulnerable to disruption, as we saw during COVID. So supply chains are the sequence of processes involved in the production or distribution of a commodity. So as we saw with COVID and things like beef and pork, for example, our prices went way up and our supply went way down. And this is because we rely on exports from other countries, primarily for our meat. And then lastly is this lack of young farmers in Canada. Young people, for whatever reason, are just not becoming farmers. This is both in Canada and the rest of North America. They are choosing other careers, which means that once all of our current farmers retire, what's going to happen to Canadian agriculture? But one of the largest problems, or one of the largest threats rather, to food security is the loss of natural areas and the ecosystem services that they provide. So an ecosystem service is a service that nature provides to us for free. So things like pollination services, climate control, soil health, water health, and pest control are all ecosystem services that nature provides to farmers that helps them to be able to get good yields and keep the land and crops healthy.
For some context on how things have changed over a 20-year period from 2001 to 2021, the population of Ontario has grown 24.5%, but the number of farms has decreased by 19.05%, and the total amount of farmland has decreased by 12.9%. Ontario is not alone in facing these food security concerns. Other provinces and markets throughout the world are facing this together, and we can't rely on anyone else to help. For a bit more detail on the current status of key agricultural commodities in Ontario, here we have created a quadrant plot that compares the production trend for commodities in Ontario between 2006 and 2021 with Ontario's 2021 trade status for that commodity, indicating whether we are a net importer or exporter. Crop growth is measured in acres, livestock is measured in animals, apiculture is measured in colonies, and maple is measured in number of taps. Here you can see the complete plot with each quadrant and commodity labeled, but we will now go through each individual quadrant and explain what a commodity's placement in that area means. Quadrant 1, we are producing more of what we export, which are primarily cash crops that don't feed people, so our land is being converted to export and non-food production. Though increased maple production and export seems great, it could be linked to the conversion of what were once more diverse farms to primarily sugar bushes. Quadrant 2, we are producing more of these goods, but not to the degree that we can meet our domestic demand. Therefore, we are still a net importer. Apiary growth is an excellent indicator of future agricultural pollination potential, a key ecosystem service for food security. And if beef and poultry continue their upward production trends, we feel processing and regional distribution would be the keys to directing those increases into regional markets, thus contributing to enhanced food security. Quadrant 3, commodities in this quadrant are being produced less, and Ontario is a net importer. If production continues to decline, that will mean additional reliance on imported goods to meet demand. This is the most concerning quadrant from an Ontario food security perspective, as it is home to both fruits and vegetables. Quadrant 4, Ontario is a net exporter of these commodities, but they are being produced less in the province. With consolidation of livestock operations has come less need for individual farms to produce hay and alfalfa as animal feed, and the markets and supports for wheat, corn, and soy are a significant factor in the declining production of these other field crops. And finally, circled in red on this slide are the commodities not primarily consumed directly by humans in Ontario. And please consider for a moment which quadrant these commodities fall into. All of the commodities circled have a net export trade balance, and the majority are continuing to see increased growth in Ontario, despite the fact they are not doing a lot to feed people in Ontario. Now for a deeper look at some concerning case studies of Ontario's agricultural sectors related to food security. First off, we have the case of declining beef and dairy cattle. Ontario is raising less beef and losing dairy farms, while importing more beef and dairy products than ever before. Looking at these charts, we can see that between 2001 and 2021, there have been declines of approximately 50% for farms with dairy cattle in Ontario and 40% for farms with beef cattle in Ontario. This has been offset by an increase in imported beef and dairy products, as since 2009, the value of Ontario's beef imports has grown by approximately 67%, and dairy imports have grown by approximately 147%. These problems are further compounded by the circumstances we mentioned earlier. Not only are farms with beef and dairy cattle decreasing, while the value of our beef and dairy imports increase, but we are increasingly exporting live animals while importing cuts of meat and meat products coming from those livestock animals that generate added value in a livestock product's life cycle. Our next case study focuses on the rise of cash cropping, which is a growing trend in Ontario. Farmers have been intrigued by strong profit margins and low labor needs, but the practices used to produce these crops typically have a more significant impact on the environment. Cash crop farming is also restrictive to new farmers due to the cost of specialized equipment required for production and the scale necessary to accommodate that equipment. On top of those factors, this is the style of farming that has been promoted and supported by recent provincial governments. Much of the production is for export, and the vast majority is not for direct human consumption by Ontarians. Those characteristics of cash crop production mean less farmland available to directly grow food for humans and less profit in Ontario's food system. While we believe that this is not a sustainable approach or perspective, the case for focusing on cash crop production, mostly for export, has swayed many farmers in Ontario. Keep in mind that cash crop production is working against nature in a variety of ways, such as the scale of pesticide use needed, which impacts pollinators, degrades habitats that filter water, and reduces effectiveness and availability of natural pest control agents. Here you can see the growth in cash crop production as a percentage of Ontario's farmland, while all other land uses decline. Next, we will look at greenhouse vegetable production in Ontario. Year over year, total meters of greenhouse area harvested has been increasing. By 2021, total harvested area reached over 14 million square meters across 755 farms in Ontario with greenhouse vegetable production area. Although Ontario is the largest greenhouse vegetable producing province in Canada, over half of what is grown in Ontario is not for Ontarians and is almost completely exported to the USA. 95+% of greenhouse vegetable harvested area in Ontario is tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. This is an issue considering that we import large amounts of vegetables such as lettuce from the USA, which could be grown in Ontario. Moreover, greenhouses rely heavily on temporary foreign labor, which does not promote regional food security. And then, as you can see here, square meters of greenhouse vegetable production area has been growing, as has the percentage of Ontario's total greenhouse production space that is allotted to greenhouse vegetables, as opposed to flowers or other greenhouse products that are not food. So why is this happening? Farmland loss. Farms and farmland acreage are in decline throughout the province as additional land is developed to accommodate Ontario's rising population. Aging farmers with few succession plans. Succession plans for independent farms are rare in Ontario, and fewer young people are interested in becoming farmers. In a 2018 survey, less than 1% of youth aged 14 to 35 who knew what career they wanted to pursue chose agriculture or natural resource related careers. Expensive farmland. Competing uses for farmland, such as development, expansion, investment, have inflated farmland acquisition cost as to make it prohibitively expensive in many areas for new farmers. To justify such expenditure, only the most extractive production practices, which maximize profit while dismissing all negative social and environmental externalities, are utilized in an attempt to generate maximum profit as quickly as possible. Lastly, trade and distribution. Reliance on imported goods and production that does not feed Canadians and is intended for export, and corporate consolidation and control of distribution channels creates many difficulties for farmers looking to get their products into regional markets unless it is done at an absolutely massive scale. The fragility of this approach was further exposed by supply chain constraints seen during the COVID pandemic. At the same time, this system, with an export production focus and billions of dollars spent importing goods we could grow here, creates additional levels of separation and profit extraction between consumers and the farmers in their region producing goods they would like to purchase and eat.
So now that we've heard about these problems and why they're happening, what about the solutions? So one great solution is the land between region. So the land between, also known as Ontario's cottage country, has its southern borders around Kawartha Lakes in Peterborough, and its northernmost points to the west around Parry Sound, through Halliburton and over into Renfrew in the east. So it is a geologically unique area because it is the meeting of the fertile St. Lawrence lowlands in the south and the Canadian Shield to the north. So this provides a unique meeting which has the opportunities for agricultural landscapes across the region and very diverse kinds of agriculture. So one major reason that the land between is a solution for Ontario food security is the fact that the land between is has many intact natural systems, many of which have been lost or degraded in the rest of Southern Ontario. So we're going to go through them one by one. So the first one is ecosystem services provided. So the natural areas of the land between provide high functioning ecosystem services. As we mentioned before, ecosystem services are services that nature provides to us for free of charge. So those things include water filtration, flood attenuation, and pollination. Next is the land between is a refuge for a multitude of wildlife species, which help to keep ecosystem services functioning optimally. Next is the land between also has a very diverse landscape. And this diverse landscape allows for many different ecosystem services to occur, as well as the high biodiversity that it supports. So these all kind of interconnect to create a very strong system. Next is water supply and filtration. So the land between has strong water supply with the ecosystem services that water supply can provide, such as filtration. So it is also the headwaters for much of Southern Ontario, meaning that the land between is already significant for agriculture in the region south to it. Pollinator refuge. So pollinators are very important for agriculture and many of the different crops that we enjoy. These crops include peppers, cucumbers, squash, strawberries, and apples. Next is the intact habitats of the land between support natural pest control, such as strong populations of swallows, bats, and snakes. Swallows and bats can help to consume insect pests, and snakes help with pests like rats, for example. And then lastly, it is an area of climate change resilience. So due to the special geology, the soils, and the topography, the different elevation, the land is naturally insulated from the effects of climate change. And this helps to keep all of the microclimates intact. For example, differences in elevations help to do that. Next is why agriculture. So we've talked about why nature in the land between makes the region a solution, but there are other reasons as well. So the land between's culture is another reason. It has a long heritage and culture of adaptation and entrepreneurial spirit. So due to the landscape and how dynamic it was, people throughout settler history, at least of the land between, have had to adapt to the different challenges that the land provides, and this has created the resiliency that we still see in the culture today. Next is capacity. So the land is suitable for agriculture. It is especially well suited for pastured livestock, hay, animal feed, and greenhouses. And then lastly is the cost. So purchasing and operating a farm within the land between is significantly cheaper, up to 50 to 60% cheaper than the land that you find in the rest of Southern Ontario. So financially, it makes sense to have a farm here. They have low operating costs, equipment is less costly, and compared to the rest of Southern Ontario, it is significantly cheaper, whereas the rest of Southern Ontario has some of the most expensive farmland in the country. So now we know why the land between is one of the solutions to Ontario's food security problems. But what can we do for a food secure future? What do we need to do? So there are many promising solutions to a food secure future and to food solutions to provide a food secure future, sorry. So one is to create policy that supports farmers and local food systems. Two is to explore nature-based and water-conscious solutions. We need to re-normalize the use of agroecology and intercropping, diverse cropping. Agroecology and intercropping are cropping methods that historically used to be used frequently and are still used heavily in other parts of the world where they don't necessarily use this super industrialized agriculture that we see here. Another solution is to protect and preserve farmland, to focus on community food security. So not just focusing on Ontario food security as a total, but also focusing and making sure that each community is able to feed itself or has a means to feed itself. Next is to conduct more research on and utilization of adapting farming practices. And then lastly is to encourage youth to become farmers and support new farmers. So these are just like some of the solutions that we could execute. And then here we're going to talk about some of the threats that they combat. So this slide highlights the market-based threats to food security. So how a globalized food market has affected food security, for example. So you can see here that, policy, agroecology, protecting farmland, ensuring community food security, and encouraging new and young farmers help to address some big issues in food security, like supply chain control, this trade agreements and supply chain disruption, this transition to cash crops, and the lack of young farmers. And then next here we have some of the nature-based threats to food security. So it's not just markets that are threatening food security, it's also the state of our natural systems, right? So things like global population growth, climate change and water scarcity and pollution, farmland development, and loss of natural areas are all having negative effects on food security. And again, every single solution that we've mentioned applies to these nature-based threats. So policy, nature-based solutions, agroecology, protecting farmland, ensuring community food security, funding and conducting adaptive farming research, and again, encouraging new and young farmers. So what the Land Between charity plans to do for a food secure future is we would like to promote and start our project, Feeding the Land Between. So with this project, we will be building a network for farmers and communities. So our vision is to build and empower a regional network to take actions and increase capacity, resulting in enduring food security in the land between and therefore Ontario. So this is our vision, but what exactly is our plan? So to advance food security in Ontario and feeding the land between, we have kind of a 5-step plan. So step number 1 is to host stakeholder and input networking sessions across the region. So we'll travel across the region, we'll talk to farmers and suppliers, distributors, community members, and help to connect everybody together to learn more about agriculture and the challenges within the region. So we're creating these connections, and through creating these connections, we're also helping to build capacity. So what are our steps forward? How can we strengthen the systems? So step 3 is to identify opportunities and priority actions. So after consulting and hearing what different farmers and individuals across the region are saying about the state of agriculture and food security, we will use this information to identify opportunities and ways forward that we can move forward and actually help to enhance food security in the region. And then after identifying these opportunities, we will create local action plans and a dynamic regional strategy. So with all the input and consultations that we've had and everything that we've identified, we will distill this into a plan to enhance food security going forward based on all of the evidence and conclusions that we have gathered. And then lastly is the goal is to raise the profile of farming and revitalize farming heritage in the region. The region has a very long and resilient heritage of farming. And as we've seen, farmer loss and few succession plans over the last many years, we want to help to, reinvigorate farming and increase succession planning and increase youth in farming and just help farmers to share information with each other and all of that great stuff. So now we'll talk about outputs.
So in order to achieve our vision, our plan will have several outputs, including more municipal food charters. So far, TLB only has 8 areas that have accepted food charters, and few aspects of food security are considered in the more common planning documents, such as official plans. Our second output, creating marketing plans to help farmers reach local markets that they desire to participate in and feel would be a good option for them. Our third output, map existing farms and farm potential to have an idea of how areas are changing and what their capacity is to enhance food security in the future. Output number 4, many different townships and communities have diverse landscapes, extension services, adaptation methods, and farming practices that could help other individuals, farmers, producers, etc., to identify best practices and put them to use. And our fifth output, maps of market accessibility. A common complaint from farmers is that they do not know where or how they can get their product into different markets. Understanding regional nuances, markets, and distribution channels will help us better understand and strategize how to overcome market accessibility issues. We need your help to make this a reality and to improve our food security. Help contribute to making our dream of food secure communities in Ontario possible. There are many ways you can be a part of the solution. Make a financial donation as a business or individual. Sponsor a networking roadshow or even the Feeding the Land Between project as a whole. Lend your support by participating in our events, conversations, and promoting Feeding TLB to your networks to help us build and create relationships throughout our regional food systems. Thank you for watching our presentation, Feeding the Land Between today. Please feel free to reach out and follow up with us on any topics discussed or that you would like to bring up.